In an era gripped by turmoil, God and Country emerges as a scathing indictment of Christian nationalism, chokehold on America. The expose unveils the cancerous roots of a movement perverting faith for political gain. The film exposes the unholy alliance between evangelical zealotry and authoritarian ambition. It ignites the screens as it ignites the screens nationwide. God and Country is a rallying cry against the malevolent forces of Christian nationalism corroding our nation. The story is from the Washington Post by Michelle Boorstein on January 11th, 2024. I have a lot to say about this, so I'm going to let the panel go ahead and have their say. Scott, what do you think?
Sure. Thanks, Jonathan. Well, we cover Christian nationalist creep a lot on this show. We've warned about the harm that it can bring in the form of religious oppression, attacks on the democratic roots of our nation. It's frightening. It's a frightening concept, and it's looming large, especially recently. And from my eyes, one of the most worrisome aspects of this is that most Americans don't know anything about it. Pew Research did a report in 2022, and they found that over half of American adults, when asked, how much, if anything, have you heard or read about Christian nationalism, answered nothing at all. That was 54% of American adults had read and heard nothing at all about Christian nationalism. Non-Christians were more familiar with the term than Christians, no surprise there, with atheists being the most familiar. Also, not surprisingly, Democrats were more familiar with Christian nationalism than Republicans were, and younger adults were more familiar than older adults. So what is Christian nationalism? Let's define our terms up the front here. I did find actually a pretty good definition in Wikipedia, and I like this definition because I think it was a good explanation of the phenomenon, but it might be the first time I've heard a particular word used in a sentence. See if you can spot the word. Christian nationalism is a type of religious nationalism that is affiliated with Christianity. It primarily focuses on the internal politics of society, such as legislating civil and criminal laws that reflect their view of Christianity and the role of religion in a political and social life. In countries with a state church, Christian nationalists seek to preserve the status of Christian state by holding an anti-disestablishmentarian position to perpetuate the church in national politics. Christian nationalism supports the presence of Christian symbols in the public square and state patronage for the practice and display of religion, such as Christmas as a national holiday, school prayer, the exhibition of nativity scenes during Christmas, and the Christian cross on Good Friday. And that was the Wikipedia definition. And they addressed this idea that people generally don't know what we're talking about when we talk about Christian nationalism. They addressed this in the article. When asked what discussions did you have about the term and the fact that many people don't know it, producer Rob Reiner had this to say. That's the critical part of this, because people have to understand the difference between Christian nationalism, which essentially says my way or the highway, and resort to anything to get what they want, including violence, and the true teachings of Jesus about peace and love. We're trying to get people to understand the difference, and that's been the challenge. So that was the producer, Rob Reiner. Same question from the director, Dan Partland. He had to say, I think the term is very problematic because it sounds pro-Christian and very patriotic. It does. Christian nationalism. It's got the two words right there in the name. It doesn't self-describe. The film takes time to explain it's actually not a faith at all. It's a political ideology masquerading as a faith. And it turns out it's not very Christian and it's totally un-American. Now, as someone that's not a Christian, I might take an issue with Reiner's idea that the true, quote unquote, teachings of Jesus Christ are all about peace and love. But Christians think that, and I think that's the important part. The Christians need to understand that with Christian nationalism, they're not getting what they think they're getting out of the deal here. They're not sure what they're signing up for. So I'm happy that this documentary was made. I hope it shines an illusory, no, what's the word I'm looking for? And illusory. It shines a light on this particular problem that the world is dealing with right now. Glenn, Infidel, take us out of here.
You know, I think the one thing you said really nailed it. and that is that the illusion of Christianity and what Christianity means is what people are selling in one way, but this is very much not that. And not only is it not Christianity as they want to perceive it as themselves, but it's also not really American nationalism, because the truth is that, as you pointed out, being an American and supporting what the United States Constitution says is exactly the opposite. So really, when it gets down to it, what we think of as nationalism as a U.S. citizen, or what we think of as Christian, or what they think of as Christian, it fails on both parts. It is absolutely not that. And, to hammer on another point you said, is that a lot of people don't know what Christian nationalism is. And that is so very true, because when I run across people who I would say, damn, that's Christian nationalism, they would not even know what that term means quite often, and absolutely deny it if you said, hey, you're a Christian nationalist. I hate to resolve things down to memes, but what we call Christian nationalism reminds me of a meme I saw recently, where in Germany, that's what they say. That's why your great grandpa moved to Argentina. It's Christo-fascism, because make no mistake about it, they want something very different. I'm glad to see Rob Reiner get on this. Name recognition, some exposure. I don't know how rapidly it's going to expose people and make them aware of what they're standing for, what they believe in, and exactly how terrible it is. But there's plenty of people that are there in the middle who could be swayed by what sounds good, what tickles their ears and seems reasonable, because that's oftentimes, we've discussed, you mentioned us discussing Christian nationalism, but it's not just that. We hear terms all the time, moms for liberty, all these different things of, and time and again, they're none of those. And this is just another example of people who have a label. And even though most of the time they don't self-apply it, honestly, I think it's a phrase that we probably should all quit using. And I'm going to try to go with Christo-fascist, because that really is a more accurate representation of who and what they are. Now, it did mention that this was something that they wanted people to bring people and get people who are on that fringe to watch. And I thought that was a really good idea, because this exposure in a setting like this is hopefully something that will turn that tide enough that we can start seeing this go away. Because at the end of the day, we're seeing church attendance fall consistently. We're seeing Christianity in this country hurting really bad. They're losing members. They're losing interest. The youth are just absolutely leaving them in droves. And I really hope that this is one of those things that helps bring about that turning point. Now, like you, Jonathan, I got plenty of things to say, but I'll spare you all of them right now. Just wonder what your take was.
The first thing I noticed from the commentary is that it starts and ends with a video of January 6th, 2021 in the Capitol. It's basically at least the pre-films are kind of focusing on the violent nature of the Christo-fascists who are doing this. There was a lot of Christian iconography amongst the insurrectionists, and that's no accident. So keeping that in mind, the second point I noticed is that Christian nationalism is a political, not a religious movement. They use the terms in that of Christianity. They use the vocabulary to try and get their political agenda taken care of. It is not a Christian organization by any stretch. So especially not under the definitions of the more mainline Christian faiths who deny that they're even Christians. And so this is something that the film takes time to explain. It's actually not a faith at all. It's a political ideology masquerading as a faith. And it turns out that it's not very Christian and totally un-American. And I agree. This is a substantial threat to the United States government. So anyway, thirdly, the Christo-fascists do not seem concerned that they're in the minority. Their focus is to limit or prevent people from voting, as many as possible as they can. The review the review article from Hollywood Reporter quoted the co-founder of the Heritage Foundation. This is an extremist totalitarian think tank in Washington, D.C. They call themselves conservatives. That is not what they are. They are basically fascists who are trying to take over the government. And they have been since their inception. But one of their leaders, Paul Weyrich, and I'll out him online, I don't care, saying in a speech, I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of the people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections quite candidly goes up as the voting populace goes down. So this is a planned thing. And if you see all the voter suppression bills that have been passed in all the conservative states, these things are written up and sent around by things like the Heritage Foundation. They are shared, and then those bills go around and get passed in multiple states, as many as they can. And they always use patriotic language like freedom. You'll never hear them use equality, but they will use the one word, freedom. This is about your freedom. So they're scaring you that you're going to be somehow enslaved by giving people full rights. Anyway, it doesn't necessarily have to make sense. It just has to emote enough for them. And worth repeating from WPRR, it's a shrinking minority of people who embrace these ideas, but a solidifying and hardening minority. In terms of history, we know that you have to have 25 to 30% of a country that is doggedly pro-fascism, and that's enough to take over a country. So that's a scary thought. And Christian nationalists are willing to do anything, including violence, to get what they want. And they have done so, as the film explains. So I have a few other things to say, but they're mostly statistical, and I don't want to bore people, but I'm going to give a real quick rundown. Christians of all stripes used to be between 75 and 80% of the U.S. population. Recent surveys have put the population of Christians shrinking by 11% per decade. 1996 was almost two-thirds of Americans, 65%, identified as white and Christian. And by 2006, it had declined to 54%. And by 2017, it was down to 43% white Christian. Now, there's about 25% of Christian people of color. So you can see that they're down in the 68th percentile now and falling rapidly. 11% per decade is a lot of people leaving the religion. So, and the sense that comes from the 2020 PRRI Census of American Religion, the American religious landscape in 2020. 7 in 10 Americans, 70%, identify as Christian, including more than 4 in 10 who identify as white Christian, and more than 1/4 who identify as Christian of color. Nearly 1 in 4 Americans, 23%, are religiously unaffiliated, and 5% identify with non-Christian traditions. So this is just a sample, and there's a little bit more to say, but I'm going to pass this back to Scott.
Yeah, that was really interesting. You mentioned about how Christianity as a whole is shrinking in the United States, but I would say that even within Christianity, then this extremist, wing of the Christian machine is shrinking even faster, I think, or at least I would hope. And I wonder if this is, the old saying about how, the drowning man is the most dangerous, right? They people, when they see things when they see the walls falling down around them, to borrow a term from the Bible, they start to panic. They start to worry about losing footing, about really. I mean, let's be honest. It's about losing privilege, right? It's not about, it's not about liberty. It's not about freedom. It's about losing that privilege. And so when they see that kind of slipping through the fingers, the reaction then is to squeeze tighter, get that iron grip on that and to hold on to those last little bits and possibly even change the game so that then you don't have to worry about losing power. But I'm curious. I want to ask this of both of you here. We talk about Christian nationalism a lot. Do you think in general that the movement consists of nationalists taking advantage of Christians, Christians taking advantage of nationalists, some rich, powerful white guys, that are separate from both groups taking advantage of both of them, or none of the above? I mean, what do you think is the political, because we are talking about a political motivation here, political movement, but who's using whom here? And what do you think, Infidel?
Well, I have to say that you had mentioned hoping that Christian nationalism was on the decline as well, as rapidly as Christianity in general. And I've got to push back on that because it's related to your question, because I know the people that I know who sit there on pews who 10 years ago barely voted or not at all, completely apolitical. And now they're neck deep in it because they go to their church and they're radicalized week after week after week with the same nonsense over and over again. So I think that what we're seeing is yes, we're seeing Christianity die, but I think that while that man is drowning, I think that there are plenty of Christians who, while they're recognizing this and they see the world around them changing, I think they fear that, and that they're finding comfort and some type of safe haven among this idea that they're going to stand up against this evil that's attacking them, and they're going to come together. And I think that it's something that they're being taken advantage of by no less than the GOP. If we look back, Jonathan mentioned earlier about how they were voter suppression and all of these things. I mean, these are tactics that the GOP has been doing for at least 4 decades. They don't want people to vote. They want less people to vote because in a smaller pie, if you have your people voting, you'll come out ahead. So I think that this is politics driving the bus. And I think that there are people who, we can look back 40 years ago and start seeing where certain issues started coming to the forefront, like abortion and all these other issues, the moral majority and all these things decades ago. I think this is what got us here. 30 years ago, when I was working for David Duke on the white supremacists on a campaign, well, 3, there are things we wouldn't say now that they say now openly. They say it in their churches. They say it in their speeches. They say it right out up front that we even then wouldn't have said because we knew it wasn't palatable. But right now, I think that as a whole, there are so many what we consider normal Christian churches who have been radicalized to a point where these things are the norm. They're accepted. It doesn't even ring a bell in their head that, something doesn't sound right here, because it's telling them what they want to hear, when they want to hear it, and it's telling them you're the victim, you're being wronged, and you need to stand up to that. So I think that while politics is driving the bus, definitely this goes back. Well, this is why, because this goes back 40, 50 years. And at this point, I think that until they get that straight up slap in the face, they're going to keep running this way because they think that not only do they have right on their side, but they've got God on their side. And that's the part that scares me the most, because if you got an all-powerful God standing behind you, really, as the Bible, I think, says, if God is for us, who can stand against us? I believe that's a verse in Acts. But, that is the bottom line. And as long as that mentality is there, we're going to continue seeing this over and over again. And Jonathan, you wanted to add anything to this?
Just that there was another statistic here that just to accent it, white Christian evangelicals were 14% of the population. So they are way exaggerating their power by being the loudest and squeakiest wheel. When they are losing relevance in society, and when religious people, most zealots are the most dangerous at that point, like we were saying. I have a word of warning. If they turn this country into a totalitarian regime or a theocracy, the first thing to go will be any religion that is not Protestant or the preferred brand of Protestant, evangelical Christianity. So it's an existential threat to the Constitution and Christianity, atheism, Hindus, Sikhs, Judaism, pagan, heathen, and others that have, some of these people only have slight disagreements in theology, and they're all going to be oppressed. The only thing you'll see in a theocracy is the one religion that is in power. A dictator really has no use for preachers, Congress, or courts. There's major differences, but they have no use for them except for PR. Like if they want to say there was a free and fair election, even though they're just putting themselves back in, then they make fun of it. But all who will or may turn against them for their own power, be warned. And that includes the people who take power and make their religion the state religion, because the dictator may decide that you're trying to take too much of his power away, and then you'll end up like everybody else, destroyed, basically. So that's my word of warning to I don't know, everybody who's not a Baptist, extreme, evangelical or the ilk, or if you're in a small evangelical church that has small differences, like, between you and the one on top. So Scott?
Dire warning indeed, Jonathan. Dire warning indeed. And Infidel, you were saying about how, although Christianity is shrinking, it seems like these extremist voices are growing within Christianity. Maybe they see the pond kind of drying up, and so they want to get their last little bits that they can. And so, unfortunately, I think this is not the last that we've heard of Christian nationalism. But thank both of you for talking with me about this. If you don't want this to be the last you see of the nonprofits, then you can click right up here for more.